Welcome back to Balderdash Academy. So we are here today with visiting Professor Dave Ciampa. Dave is a podcaster. He's the co-host of Ciampa and Klein, The Airwolf Years, and prior to that, you should definitely check out Ciampa and Klein, The Knight Rider Years, as well as Call Me Cordelia. It's an podcast that he co-hosts with his wife, Kristen. He's a dad. He loves camping. He loves his family, and he has an extensive VHS collection. I do too, except it's holding up shelving in my office right now. So, Dave, welcome to Balderdash Academy.
Thanks, guys. I'm so excited to be here. This has been, I've been looking forward to this for actually a long time since I knew that the show was kicking off. Nice. Really excited.
Well, you definitely fit for a number of reasons. So, the first thing I want to talk to you about is I listened to your interview on faculty member Randy Hunt has a podcast, We All Have a Story. You should check it out. And you were talking about your love of the 80s and the shows that you were thinking of doing. So Knight Rider, Airwolf, what attracts you to 80s adventure TV?
So I don't think I mentioned, but prior to Knight Rider, my co-host Greg and I had actually done the entire 7-season run of MacGyver.
Yes.
Prior to that, on an entirely separate thing. Actually, Nate was on about 5 or 6 episodes of that show.
Awesome.
It was so fun.
But did you have a pocket knife?
I actually, my co-host Greg bought me this right after we closed the show. He got me a Swiss Army knife.
And links to everything are in the description.
Yes.
Ooh, Swiss Army knife link?
Swiss, yes.
Sure.
Okay, good. I don't know where to buy one.
I'll hook you up with Victorinox. Why not? Not a sponsor, though, if you'd like to.
I mean, sure. We'll take anyone.
So you were saying you did Knight Rider. You did
MacGyver.
MacGyver.
Yep. The thing about the 80s is that, we Greg and I talk about this all the time, and this is what's the biggest. It's such a time capsule era that can really never be replicated. There's just so much. There's so much fun in just free spirit in any show we watch, especially, it's just there's stuff you can't really do nowadays. And it's just so much fun to look back and realize this stuff is so much fun to watch. And just to be obviously we're a part of a very little part of that, but it's just a blast. It's such a fun little time capsule to look back on and say, wow, they really did that back then. It's absolutely phenomenal to do this. And we're hoping to continue for as long as we can, for as many 80 shows as we can get under our belt,
or at least get your hands of. A lot of them you can't find it right now.
Right.
Many
Absolutely,
of them,
absolutely. One of the shows we were looking to do after we had done Knight Rider, before we decided on Airwolf, was T.J. Hooker. The William Shatner cop procedural. The series, the complete series package is so expensive, and it's not found anywhere else, and they don't have full seasons anywhere. But it is. It's really difficult to find. But I think.
But then you look at some of the more obscure stuff like Manimal, V.
Yeah.
V you can finally get now, but anything like that, stuff that growing up at that time period. I was a kid. I was at elementary school all through the 80s, and I loved it.
Yeah.
So it was almost like they were shows built specifically for me, with that over-the-top naivete that we had in the 80s. And I think it was needed because at any moment, we expected to kind of die in a Holocaust. Just a big fiery, you're not there tomorrow. Have fun today.
I'm so glad things have changed.
Simpler time.
I worked through most of the Cheers series. I think that started in the 80s, but is it mostly 90s?
Yeah, and so the thing,
Cheers? Yeah.
Cheers was like late 80s, early 90s. So the thing about Greg,
me too.
Yeah, the thing about Greg with choosing television shows is Greg hates sitcoms of any capacity, because at one point I wanted to do the Golden Girls. As a show, I wanted to run that for a couple of years, but he hates sitcoms so passionately that there was just no way I was going to convince him to do anything but the strict 80s action adventure shows.
I just want to get you on the record. Are you ever going to consider doing Quantum Leap?
Oh,
we talked about Quantum Leap for quite a while. I think the problem with Quantum Leap is it spills too far into the 90s for us to truly cover it. The reason we did MacGyver was because 5 of the 7 seasons were mid to late 80s, and then they did the TV movies in 94, and then that was it. So we felt like that was close enough to the cusp. We're strictly 80s.
So what's your favorite 80s TV show?
Yeah, exactly. Tomundo.
What's your favorite?
You know, I have to say, for as much crap as we gave the show, I really have to say I think Knight Rider might be right at the top of my list for one of my fave. I have no recollection of this show from when I was a child. Of course, you know, it debuted in 82, the year I was born, and it went off the air when I was 4. So I have no recollection, but I have to put this show right up near the top of my list. It is just balls to the wall. There's just nothing believable. Obviously, nothing believable about it, but it's so fun to watch, and it's so enjoyable. Way more so, I think, than we ever had with seven years of MacGyver. MacGyver just got stale, which is probably why Knight Rider was only lasted 4 seasons. They ran out of ideas like halfway through. What else can you do with a talking car that shoots oil slicks out of its tailpipe and smoke screens people, you know?
I think Molly's got an idea of what you could do with that.
That was a Pixar movie.
Why didn't they just put like Kit in retirement, make him an RV that does cool tricks?
You see, now what a phenomenal follow-up series that would be. Michael and Kit retire, just transfer his consciousness into an RV, and they just drive the country together doing nothing.
I mean, it's like what he did with Baywatch Nights.
Yes.
There was a series very similar to Knight Rider that was basically that concept, but instead of an RV, it was a modular big rig that also turned into a helicopter. So, I mean, Knight Rider spawned a ton of spin-offs, particularly in the 80s.
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Yes.
Chitty
Sure.
bang bang, chitty
Yes.
chitty bang
Yeah.
bang.
Absolutely.
Yeah, talk about time travel, right?
Dude, the crossover would be incredible. Can you imagine Dick Van Dyke like hopping out of Kit and just like with his long legs?
All right.
Like,
We typically don't do a question in this segment, but who wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang? And what else did he write?
Michael Knight.
Ian Fleming
Andrew Lloyd
and
Webber.
James Bond.
Really?
Jamie.
Right.
Well, there you go.
That's so weird, isn't it?
Yeah. So,
Honestly, that's a good crossover. Ooh.
it would be, yeah. One of the weird things about growing up in the 80s is realizing when I was in college that my biggest role model growing up was a character in a half-hour toy commercial. Right? It's like
That explains so much
Optimus
about you,
Prime,
Bob.
right? It does. But it does. I think most Gen Xers have that, where the characters that we looked up to in 80s media were your cartoon toy commercials, were your Optimus Prime or your Duke or your Snake Eyes.
Which is a good question. Dave, do you review cartoons of the 80s? Because those are epic. Thundercats, ho.
You know, I really did I wanted to do a cartoon series. And at one point, my 10-year-old and I, last summer, we started reviewing all the classic episodes of Alf.
Oh,
That's a good idea.
And it's something that I want to continue with her because she loves to podcast, just to come down and talk with me for a half an hour a week. So I have to come up with the right 80s cartoon for her because she's not an animated fan, but if I found the right one for her, like a Thundercats, I think that would fit so perfectly.
What about Fraggles?
Snorks. What about
Fraggles?
the Snorks?
Ooh.
Fraggle Rock.
Fraggle Rock would be a really good one. Absolutely.
Fraggle Rock isn't a cartoon.
That's what he's
Well,
saying.
no, but it's still a kid's
It's a
show.
puppet.
So looking at all of those like forced commercial role models that we had as a kid, at least from the 80s, you as an adult, which one would you look at now as an actual role model from those adventure shows of the 80s?
You know,
if any. I mean, other than Kit, right?
Right, because who didn't want to be the car? I'm definitely not going with Michael Knight based on what I know of him over 4 years. Honestly, I really appreciate the fact. Going back onto the Knight Rider, Devin Miles, who he's the director of the Foundation for Law and Government. He's Michael's supervisor. He just has this stateliness about him. Just this, everything is. It's this responsibility kind of all falls on him, and that's sort of how I feel specifically. Like as a dad and a husband, like I feel this level of responsibility. You know, as a family man. And it really resonated, like watching Devin parent Michael over the course of 4 years. You know, there's almost every single episode Michael Knight is trying to go on vacation just so he can be on a boat in the middle of the Caribbean with a bunch of women. But every time, right before he's about to get there, Devin calls him on the video phone on the car and calls him immediately back to a mission, almost like he knows that he needs to keep Michael out of trouble. And that's, I'm watching Devin in the show realizing like, wow, I kind of do, not to that extent, but that's sort of like that level of responsibility falls with me as well, kind of being that parent figure to everybody.
I did not think you would
you
say
talked
that.
about your...
You didn't think I'd say that?
No, I thought you were going to go with Murdoch from MacGyver.
Why would I be Murdoch?
I don't know. I just thought you really connected with him.
Because I'm a master of disguise?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're an enigma.
Oh, I appreciate that, Nate. Thank you.
Enigma.
Are you guys going to go into a breakout session?
We might.
Dave, you mentioned your family. Tell us about the podcast that you host with your wife. Tell us about Call Me Cordelia.
So that was birthed about 2.5 years ago. I had always wanted to do something with my wife in podcast form. She, since day one, since I started 4 years ago, she wanted nothing to do with any of the podcasts. She wanted absolutely nothing. She couldn't stand the fact that every week I would watch an episode of MacGyver or Knight Rider, come downstairs. She wanted nothing to do with it. So I kept thinking, I need to do something, and I want her to be involved. And so I tried to. It took me almost 6 months to figure it out. I was like, what is something she loves more than anything? Anne of Green Gables.
Ah.
Why the heck not? So I asked her. I was like, what if we just started just for fun? Let's just start an Anne of Green Gables podcast. We'll do the original miniseries from the 80s. We'll do the TV show that was on Disney Channel. We'll go over all iterations of Anne, the books. And from day one to now, it is kind of swept the country, like not the country, but we have so many listeners and so many dedicated fans of this show that sort of took off from day one that it's just become like everybody, like it's just this thing that we love to do together now. It's just a really good reason. Our lives are so hectic that it's really nice just to take an hour and a half out of our week, sit downstairs, and just talk. It's kind of, the whole show has kind of morphed into less about Anne of Green Gables. A lot of people say that they come for the Anne talk, but they stay for the back and forth, because a lot of the times we end up just getting in civil arguments over the course of the show. So a lot of people say that they come for the Anne, but they stay for the arguments and they stay for the banter, because that's really what the whole show has turned into, is just the two of us, batting back and forth with each other over the course of an hour and a half.
I'm wondering if your wife is anything like me, and that when I first watched the miniseries of Anne of Green Gables that I got out of the library, Gilbert.
She's a Gilbert stan.
Be still my heart, like first crush ever. It roped me right in. What a genuine human he is. So I'm just wondering, is your wife feeling similar?
She is. It's funny because we had this back and forth for the first couple episodes, whereas she was very much about Gilbert Blythe. I had a weirdly unhealthy obsession with Richard Farnsworth, who played Matthew Cuthbert. Absolutely. Could not get over that. Loved him. And it's funny. Yeah. So she grew up watching it on the VHS from the PBS commercials, the PBS telethons. So she would record them off the television and watch them. And so that's where her obsession started. Mine actually started as it was a sick day. I was home. It was before we got married. She's like, you know what you'd really like, honey? Just throw this in the DVD player. You'll love it. And I remember she texted me about an hour and a half into the show, and she goes, how's it going? And I think I just texted her back and said, shh. because I was so thoroughly engrossed in the show. But Cordelia has kind of taken on a life of its own. We have gotten the opportunity to interview two stars of the show over the last year. Within our first 6 months, we got an email from Sullivan Entertainment, the company that produced and directed the shows, to interview Kevin Sullivan, the director of the original 4 miniseries. So within 6 months, we got the opportunity to talk to him about his process in creating the miniseries and what his thoughts going into it were. And this whole show has kind of taken on a life of its own, and it's a blast. We went to PEI last summer with a couple of friends, and we did a bunch of episodes out there. Yeah, it's really been really been crazy the way that show has taken off.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's the perfect sick day, all day show.
It is, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you have any crossover fans between what you and Greg do and Cordelia?
No, in fact, I tell our listeners, I tell our listeners on Cordelia, don't waste your time in going over to that. Don't do that. Don't. If you have one thought about who I am as a person, just keep listening to Cordelia. Don't listen to the other show, please.
Ruin the illusion.
Yeah.
You've been a podcaster for a while now.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to somebody who either is thinking about getting into it, who got into it and they're looking for advice on how to move forward? What advice would you give to podcasters?
Honestly, the only advice I can give someone is just, if you have an idea, just do it. If you have a cell phone, if that's all you have right now, that's perfect. That's all you need. Just do it. This world is literally starving for creativity, and it's starving for fun ideas and good things. And, I never in a million years thought that our little show about 80s television would result in listeners from across the country writing us music and songs and just things like that. But it's just, you just have to do it. We had so much anxiety about starting back in 2016. I listened to our first episode a couple months ago, and it was terrible. It was just utter garbage. There was nothing. The sound was off. The volume was too low. We didn't sound like we were even ourselves. You just have to find a starting point and go with it. You will evolve as a podcaster, and you will evolve as a host and as a person. It took us 3 years to figure out the right formula to make our podcast happen. You just have to kind of just jump in feet first and go for it. That's the best advice I can give somebody.
So guys, only 2 years to go.
Exactly.
I was going to say, it took us 20 episodes to finally get something good.
Wait, we've done something good?
No, wait, what episode
I
are we
wouldn't go
on?
that far.
We're on episode 17 right now.
Okay,
so episode 20.
That's good. 2 more to go.
Yeah.
2 more to go.
And it's not tonight, that's for sure. So,
Dave, I'm wondering how, as a stan of 80s television, I'm wondering how you feel about this kind of resurgence of 80s television now being produced, like Stranger Things, like this homage to the 80s, and everyone's getting all nostalgic and lunch boxes and all this stuff coming back. What do you think?
So it's funny. So we've talked about this before on the show. So I'll be honest, I've only seen 2 episodes of Stranger Things. I was not a fan of it. I appreciate that they were recreating this era of time, and I think it's a great thing, but I never really got into that show. Thank you, Nate. I appreciate that. Nate, I'm gonna give you an alpha circuit for that one. So I'm taking 50 points away from you.
You gotta be careful what gestures you make at our guests.
I appreciate the efforts that people are going into, but I just feel like trying to recreate that era of time is so difficult, and it's very rarely done. And I'm trying to think of the last time I can remember something so good, thinking about man, they really nailed. I know Stranger Things really nailed that era. I'm just not a fan of it specifically. But it's interesting to see what different types of creators and directors are going for to recreate. And I think this sudden surge of shows and movies from the 80s, what's the one that just hit Cobra Kai? This resurgence of the classic 80s film into this really highly successful TV show, I think is great, and I love Cobra Kai. I think it doesn't happen as often as people are hoping it happens specifically, and it's sad to watch it just because I think we all grew up watching that stuff and just having these memories of seeing these things on TV, or maybe everybody. I don't know how old everybody is in here, but
Sorry, I'm gonna excuse myself from this conversation.
I'm halfway in the game.
I do have to say, like that last episode of MacGyver when they revealed his name, it was the last episode, right? Anyways, that episode was, I remember like my family around the TV. It was a cliffhanger. It was like a 3-part or something. It was, it killed me. Because if you miss it in the 80s, you miss it. Right. You can't watch it again.
If you didn't have your VCR programmed for that specific, that was it. You were done. You could maybe you'd get it in summer reruns. Yeah. But that was one of my top 10 favorite episodes of the whole series when MacGyver, he was knocked unconscious and he woke up in medieval times, and he and Merlin had to figure out it was, and that's when you found out that his name was like burned into the stone behind him, and you could only see it with a mirror in the only way MacGyver could. It was classic. Absolutely.
Yeah. And his name was Angus.
Angus, yes.
My brother's name.
That's awesome.
My brother was like, "What? Is
it me?"
What's interesting to me about a kid growing up in that time period is, like, when I watched Stranger Things, I saw myself at 10 years old in my friend's basement playing D&D. Mm-hmm. It was like that year. So to me, it was the only show that I've seen in a while that actually captured what it was really like, minus demons and government conspiracies, but what it was really like to be a kid in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen a show like that. So I'm wondering if it's too hyper-focused into that Gen X mindset, like if it's just too hyper-focused into that audience. But that's more of a statement than a question.
I will say one thing that my favorite thing about Stranger Things that kind of blew me away was the fact that they had a character named Steve that was actually cool. That's actually never happened before in cinema or television, so that was very, very cool.
I was going to say that must be the one that Bob related to because all the luscious hair.
Yes.
Hair.
I need that Steve hair.
Joe's a nice kid.
Shout out to Joe.
Joe Carey's a nice kid. Yeah. So that's the time we have for the interview. So join us when we return for our Steam Pop Quiz and Lie Again only on Balderdash Academy. Go Dashers!
Whoop, whoop, whoop.
For complete episodes and more, visit us at balderdashacademy.com.
The best part of waking up is a Pop-Tart in your pants, whether the sun is shining or not. Follow us this way for more hijinks and hilarity with Dave Ciampa on the next part of Balderdash Academy. Oh, also, make sure you stick around and catch some off-air points that were awarded for a job well done. I'm not telling who. Catch it only on Balderdash Academy.
Thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. You can find us on your favorite podcast service as Balderdash Academy.
I'm not telling. You'll have to catch the next Balderdash Academy.
Oh, Lord. Okay.
Go Dashers!